teams build off of each other's confidence, and they have these kind of like, surreal, like out of body experiences every once in a while. And it just so happened that BYU played one of those teams in the NCAA tournament. It's funny because Alabama could have had that game against Duke and probably would have beaten Duke. And granted, Duke's defense, probably had something to say about that, but Alabama could have had that game against anybody else in the tournament. They just happened to have it against BYU. Hello and welcome to the Aptive Podcast Studio. This is the Loyal Cougars podcast where we talk about what you, the fans, are talking about. I'm your host, Jake Edmonds, joined today by the coach, Brian Swindlehurst. Thanks for hopping on again, Brian, to talk about the last game of BYU season against Alabama. Plus, we'll look ahead to BYU's future. I did want to take a moment real quick, though, to talk about, just thank you, the fans, for hopping on, listening to the show, watching on YouTube. We went from 0 followers in January to now closing in on 400 at the end of March. And we couldn't have done it without any of you, subscribers, viewers, listeners. And so we thank you. If you do like what you see and what you hear on this show, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, like this video, and hit the bell to get notified whenever we upload a video. And if you're not watching on YouTube, first of all, you should. But if you are just listening to our one of our podcast channels, Spotify, Apple Music, iHeart Podcast, or whatever the heck you call those, don't forget to subscribe to those as well. And go over to YouTube and watch our YouTube channel. We're going to start hopefully putting up some game film and doing some more visual elements to this show. And so we hope you appreciate hope you appreciate that and like that. But we're going to talk about BYU basketball for probably the last time, at least in terms of game study and reviewing games, at least until next season. And Brian and I actually had the opportunity to go to the game. I don't know how you were invited, but how I was invited was pretty wild. So Tosh McIntosh, as you have seen on this show or heard on this show before, he texted me or called me on Wednesday, so the day before the game, and he's like, "Hey, do you want to go to Newark and watch BYU play?" And apparently what had happened was I think it was our CFO, Mark Lawrence, had reached out to his BYU rep. We have a sponsorship at Aptive with BYU, and so we have a bunch of people we know at BYU, and he reached out and said, "Hey, we want to be able to go to the game. Do you guys have any like discounted tickets to the game?" And they said, "We don't have discounted tickets, but we can actually hook you up with like 7 tickets if you do us a solid and bring Chad Lewis with you." So Mark pulled some strings. Our CEO, Vess Pearson, has a private jet, and so we were able to get Chad Lewis on a private jet. I actually sat in the cockpit, which was a pretty fun experience. I didn't get to fly it, but loved just interacting with the pilot. We flew into Newark. It was wild looking out the cockpit window and flying right past the Statue of Liberty and flying into Newark. And the game could have been a better experience, at least for BYU fans. But overall, the experience of going to Newark with a day's notice and hanging out with you and Tosh and a bunch of people. Chad Lewis I had never really interacted personally with Chad Lewis. One of the nicest, and just down to earth people you'll meet.
Yeah, and bleeds blue for sure.
Bleeds blue. We were crossing the street in Newark, heading toward the arena, and these locals, just two black, and this is for context, 2 black guys walking across the street the other way, just perpendicular to us. They look over the rest, and they're like, "Look at all these white people," basically like invading, like all these white people are here, and Chad yells out to him. He's like, "We're coming, we're coming," just like instantly, "We're coming." So anyway, shout out to Chad for hooking us up with some tickets, and like I said, it was a very fun experience. But let's talk about the outcome of the game, because I think that's what BYU fans are mostly talking about, and not just because BYU lost, but the way they lost it seemed very much like an anomaly in a sense, and only because of the way Alabama played. As everyone knows, Mark Sears went off 10 of 16 from 3 against BYU. Alabama scores, makes 25 3-pointers, which is an NCAA tournament record. What was your observation from Alabama's offense? What were they doing well versus what was BYU maybe not doing well?
Yeah, it's I'm sure a combination. I mean, you heard Coach Oates talk about after the game. He noticed that BYU was going under screens the whole year, and so he told his guys, "Hey, when we set a ball screen, if BYU goes under that, we want you shooting that every time," which is abnormal sometimes for how they play, right? I mean, Sears typically is a guy that's going to draw a lot of fouls. He's going to get by his defender, get in the paint, either make a play by spraying it out to a shooter or get fouled, play off of two, and so you literally saw them do the complete opposite of that. I mean, I don't know how many times he actually even got into the paint because he didn't need to. Yeah, he just shot a bunch of threes.
They attempted fewer than, I want to say towards the end of the game, I checked, it was like 15 twos. They attempted 15 twos, yeah, and had made 25 threes. So was that the strategy, was to try and take them out of what they're used to, which is getting into the paint and kicking or dishing to a big?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't know. I wasn't obviously in their practices and things, but it seemed to me that, and I don't, if I'm a coach trying to prepare, let's first of all say, if you're a coach trying to prepare for Alabama, I mean, pick your poison, yeah, right? I mean, because they are who they are. They're really, really offensively talented. So it's no easy proposition no matter what you're doing. But I definitely felt like, I could see how a coach would want to go under screens and say, you got to make them on us, right? We're going to take you out of what you usually like to do. I mean, Sears to that point, I don't know if you have the stat, Jake, but wasn't he like 3 or 4 of like his last 30 or something?
So I wrote 5 of 35. That was just a quick count. 5 of his last 35. And he was 1 of 5 against Duke.
Yeah. So, I mean, if I'm a coach and he's a 5 out of his last 35, it's like, okay, I might be willing to take the bet that we can go under and make him hit those. And if you think about it, if he misses his first one or his first 2, it's an entirely different game. Now, he made them, and, when you're a player and maybe you've been on a cold streak and you hit your first couple, now the basket gets a lot bigger, and now it's your confidence is high, and so that's, those first couple shots in a game are very, very crucial, and Sears made those, and the other players made them too. The other guard, I can't remember his name, but I mean, he banked one in when we went under his screen,
Yeah, and I thought that too. I actually remember last week I pretty adamantly asked you, I was like, why does BYU go under so many screens? But I do think that I think you're right. I think that they realized that Alabama is not the most efficient three-point shooting team, that Mark Sears is kind of a chucker. And they thought that they thought they could take advantage of his inability to consistently hit from 3. Now, obviously, that didn't play out, but I actually think that's been BYU's kind of strategy all season. Like, it's been very noticeable. Even like the most casual of fans noticed that BYU just goes under every screen. They also run zone a lot, and it's a pretty tight zone where they're not really defending guys. They're not really closing out on the perimeter, it seems like, very often. In fact, it feels like they're leaving shooters open in the corner more than I would feel comfortable with. But you got to wonder, is that a strategy? Is it a personnel thing? The other thing they were doing a lot of against Alabama was they were helping off of the ball side shooter, which means if the ball handler is driving to the right, Richie Saunders is guarding the guy in the corner on that side of the court. He sinks every time the ball handler drives. He sinks to help. Whether he's reaching in to try and steal the ball or he's just trying to intimidate. But Alabama is so good, and they have been all season, at kicking. They're driving to kick, and I don't know if this was the strategy, but it almost felt like they were daring Alabama to shoot the 3, and I don't understand that strategy. But as you said, you pick your poison. Alabama has one of the best offenses, if not the best offense in the country. And besides that, even with the fact that Mark Sears went 5 of 35 coming into that game, players just get hot. BYU fans witnessed that with Cannon catchings this year, right? The Baylor game was the biggest example of Cannon went 8 of 8 from the field, 4 of 4 from 3, had 23 points. I don't think he had 23 points the rest of the season after that game. And so that, it just happens, right? Especially at the college level, I think kids, at that age, they rely so much on momentum and so much on confidence. And If they lose it for a pretty long period of time. If they gain it, then they're hot for an entire game. And we saw that with Mark Sears. The other example that I point to, and it kind of reminded me of this game, was back in 2016 when Mark Pope was still at UVU, coming into the Marriott Center. I think they were 3-1 at the time. Like, they had a pretty good team. I want to say they even made the NCAA tournament. They won the WAC conference tournament and were an auto qualifier for the NCAA. So they were a pretty good team. But I don't think any BYU fan was expecting them to do what they did, which was score 114 points in the Marriott Center. BYU scored 101 points in that game and lost by 13. UVU went 18 of 37 from three. I think it was Connor Toulson.
Who played for me at Salt Lake Community College.
Great shooter. I think he went like 4 of 8 from three. So like, it wasn't a Mark Sears type of game for him. Isaac Nielsen also had a really good game from the interior in that game. But again, I think teams build off of each other's confidence, and they have these kind of like, surreal, like out of body experiences every once in a while. And it just so happened that BYU played one of those teams in the NCAA tournament. It's funny because Alabama could have had that game against Duke and probably would have beaten Duke. And granted, Duke's defense, probably had something to say about that, but Alabama could have had that game against anybody else in the tournament. They just happened to have it against BYU.
It's a combination, right? I mean, yes, Alabama, it's a pet peeve of mine when people say, well, gosh, they just, this team, if they didn't shoot it well, it's like, well, they just didn't make them today, or they just made them today. And sometimes there's a part of that that's true, and then sometimes it's how well did the defense guard them to give them, how many open looks did they really get?
Yeah.
And I think I'm sure if you were to ask Kevin, he would say, yeah, we could have defended better. We need to do this. We need to do this. We need to do this. And so I'm sure there's things that BYU could have done to defend him better. That being said, Alabama also made shots that were difficult and that they got in other games. If you watch that Duke game, they got some of the same shots in that game and they didn't make them.
Yeah.
Now, when you look at Duke, though, Duke is 6'6", 6'6", 6'7", 6'9", 7'2". Right, and so Duke does present a more difficult defense to be able to shoot threes against because of not only their size and their length, but you could argue some of their athleticism too. Right, the comparison of you have Sion James, who's their point guard. He's 6'6", and he's a freak athlete. And then he's the guy. He's closing out at their three, or Cooper Flagg is closing out at the three. Versus we've got BYU has Trevin Nell, who, credit to Trevin, he's an elite shooter, but he's not closing out in the same way that maybe Sion would be.
Yeah, or even what we consider elite defenders, like a Mag or a Trey Stewart. They just don't have the size, right? Or the wingspan or the length. And I think too, there's a little bit of a lack of trust in each other on defense. Now, I think they played defense pretty well when it mattered for the most part of the season. Granted, their defense wasn't necessarily winning them games, right? They were an offensive team, and we could talk about. I actually want to compare BYU's defense to some of the elite teams in the NCAA tournament. But I think there's just like a little bit of a lack of trust in the sense of like they didn't feel like they could close out hard enough, because if they get blown by, there's no help. There's nobody that can really help them. And whether that's true or not, I don't know. Maybe I think Keita probably could have helped pretty well. I think Foose was definitely a liability on defense, but I think guys like Mag, who are elite defenders, they had to kind of pick and choose when they could close out hard, because if you get blown by, you're in trouble. There's nobody really behind you, unlike a Duke who has that 7'4", I forget his name, Malawach. Like, Rudy Gobert type of influence in a game where if a guy blows by you, like, they're still not going to attempt a shot at the rim.
Yeah, and you have a guy that's like Malawach, you don't have to help as much. You can stay. Yeah. It's easier to stay to shooters because you can trust him to just clean up your mistakes if you do get blown by. Yeah. So and that's another advantage.
Your zone can be a little bit, you can extend your zone out farther too, because he's basically he's got a radius around him that he can protect around the rim. So the question then is, how far does BYU need to go to get to that level? Because the reality is, and granted, this doesn't happen every year, but the reality is this year, every team in the Final Four is a 1 seed. Every team in the Final Four has a top 40 offensive efficiency or defensive efficiency. Let me go through the numbers. Duke, by the way, I didn't realize this going into the tournament. Duke is far and away the best team in the tournament. And if you didn't pick them to win it all, you're probably going to be wrong. I actually picked Houston to win it all, and I'm kind of regretting it. So Duke has the number 1 offense, number 3 defense in terms of efficiency. Florida has the number 2 offense, number 24 defense in terms of efficiency. Auburn is sixth offense, 35th defense. Houston has the 22nd offense, number 1 defense. And Houston's defense is elite, like far and away number 1 defense. That said, BYU's number 12 offense, which is respectable, obviously a better offense than Houston, but they're they're 140th in defensive efficiency. And, like I said, I think for a good part of the season, their offense had been able to make up for their defense. And I do think that their defense tightened up a lot towards the latter half of the season. I actually think Cannon probably made their defense worse. And I can say that now because he's gone.
Yeah, Cannon was still learning, I think.
Exactly, yeah. And that's Cannon had his benefits. We already talked about Cannon's game against Baylor. Like Cannon as an offensive player, I think was had a high ceiling. Pretty inefficient, but he had a high ceiling. I do think that he saw the bench a lot because of his defensive inefficiencies, and not because he's not capable. And we can talk about Cannon a little bit later, but I think Cannon was capable. He's athletic, he's long, he's got a great wingspan. Like I think he had all of the intangibles to be a good defender. I think he just lacked the understand. I think the game was too fast for him. Yeah. He lacked the ability to understand like where is his guy going to be when all is said and done and the play is run. I think he had a really hard time diagnosing plays. But that's fine. He's a freshman, right? He's young. I think he'll learn. Even I hope he has success at wherever he goes.
I think he will,
because I still think he's an NBA talent guy. Like he's got what it takes to be an NBA guy. The game just needs to slow down for him. But again, BYU's defense needs to be where they focus on in the offseason. I think they're already starting to do that. I think AJ DeBansa, as much as we see his offensive highlights, I think he can be a defensive threat, or a defensive asset at least. And then, BYU just getting a commit from Dominique Diamande, who, again, we've seen a lot of offensive highlights. If you've seen on X or on YouTube, like he has a lot of offensive highlights from his time in France. He's also going to be a defensive asset. I know you have some thoughts on Dominique, so I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I haven't watched him a ton, but I've talked to people that are close to him and have evaluated him quite a bit, and their kind of assessment on him is that he has elite length, that he's got great athleticism, and that he can really be a lockdown defender at the highest level in college basketball. I think, there was mixed, when I asked people, there was kind of mixed reviews on his ability to make shots or his feel for the game a little bit offensively. I know some people were calling him kind of 3-and-D, which it sounds like maybe he still has a little bit more development to get to that 3 part, but it definitely seems like he's got the length and athleticism to be able to defend in the Big 12, which, is definitely something BYU needs.
Yeah. To keep up with the teams like Houston and Iowa State and, the other teams that they've played in the Big 12. Here's what NBADraftRoom.com had to say about him. They say Diamande is an intriguing developmental player who has an NBA level frame and very good athleticism. He's a high energy player who plays both ends and projects as a solid defender at the NBA level. He has decent handles and some dribble drive ability, but is more of a play finisher at this stage. He excels in the open court and is a good finisher in transition, which, looking at game film, like that's, you see that. He's a 6'7" wing. He's a projected top 50 NBA guy. Assuming he develops into that role, I think he still has, I don't think he played at all last year. He redshirted last year for Washington. So I think he needs to kind of get into that, he needs to have the game slow down for him, I think, at the college level. But again, he's played at the professional level. He has 16 points, average 16 points, 6 rebounds, 2 assists, 1.8 steals per game, which I don't know if BYU had a guy this year that averaged that many. Maybe Mag, but they weren't really a steal heavy. They didn't really sell out for the steal.
Yeah, they were playing gap defense.
Type of defense. So maybe that's not what he does, when he comes to BYU. But again, I think he's got the length and athleticism to defend at the individual level. So I wanted to read here Vinny BYU on Cougar Board. I love his perspective here. So he gives this is MJ Mill on Cougar Board. His perspective on kind of the offseason coming up and BYU's ability to recruit. He says Kevin Young wasn't hired until April 16th last year, and then he split time between his new job and his son's job until April 30th. It was amazing. He put together as good of a roster as he did with a shortened offseason and learning curve he had to deal with. Armed with a full calendar, more experience, Sweet 16 program momentum, and a growing reputation, this offseason is going to be fun. Buckle up. I mean, you have a little bit of college coaching experience. How important is that to have a full offseason to recruit, to acclimate to kind of the culture, the offense, or the team, your coaching staff? How important is that?
Well, the portal just opened up. And, everything happens in the portal, and there's only a certain amount of time the portal is going to be open. And so every single hour and every day you have to work the portal is crucial. And, obviously Kevin didn't have that in full last year. So I think that's going to help a lot. And I think, that BYU is going to find the next guys to fill, anybody that leaves or, anybody that's graduated. There's players out there that, BYU has the money and Kevin's got the resume, and obviously they went to a Sweet 16 this year. There's a lot of momentum, and so I feel like they're probably going to have a good offseason in recruiting.
This episode is brought to you by Aptiv. Aptiv believes that every home should be enjoyed. They tailor their pest control treatment plans to target pests when and where they're most active. Plus, if you see pest activity between treatments, Aptiv will return to take care of the problem at no additional cost. It's their way of making sure every customer is satisfied and every pest is controlled. If pests stay away, Aptiv is why. Visit goaptiv.com/loyal Cougars or call 844-966-4787 and mention this promotion to get your initial treatment for just $29. That's goaptiv.com/loyal Cougars or call 844-966-4787. Terms and conditions apply. Get home field advantage with Aptiv. Why should you have to choose between style and repping your team? Wooden Grail is bridging the gap between modern fashion and college fandom. Their hats and apparel are made with premium materials like suede and corduroy, featuring bold, unique designs that let you show off your team pride without sacrificing your look. Whether you're at the game or out on the town, Wooden Grail lets you do both. Check them out at woodengrail.com and step up your fan game. Use code CougarBoard for free shipping on any order. Looking to get your brand in front of BYU's most engaged fans? The Loyal Cougars podcast and Cougar Board are your perfect match. Cougar Board is the largest online community of BYU fans with thousands of posts every day. The Loyal Cougars podcast is the official podcast of Cougar Board, and we have sponsorship opportunities available for both the podcast and the site. Contact us at sponsorships@loyalcougars.com, and we'll help your message hit home with the Cougar faithful. Again, that's sponsorships@loyalcougars.com. We talk about the transfer portal of who BYU is going to bring in. I think a big part of the transfer portal is who BYU retains, who doesn't go to the transfer portal or who doesn't go to the NBA draft. And Yegor is going to be a big part of that. You and I have talked pretty extensively about Yegor. I think we both agree that Yegor's, let's just say this, Yegor can probably improve his stock if he stays another year. Is that safe to say?
I think so. That being said, I mean, I don't know where I know I've watched the draft boards or the mock drafts, and some people have him in the lottery still, and then some people have him in the kind of late teens. I think one I saw even had him in the late first round. So, I mean, if he's in the lottery's the lottery, So if I'm Yegor, if I'm in the lottery, it's going to be pretty hard to say no to the lottery. Mm-hmm. How much higher can you really get than even if you're in the late lottery? Can you, So I could see that being hard. If it looks like he ends up being lower in the first round, I could maybe see him consider it. But I don't know. It also depends on, I'm sure money's a factor too.
Yeah, I was going to say that. So I think the biggest advice, if people were to give him advice against staying, is you're throwing away potential money, right? You're throwing away a lot of potential money, and I think that NIL has kind of countered that a little bit to the point where, maybe BYU can't give him the same amount of money as an NBA team for a rookie contract. I actually don't know what a first year of a rookie contract would be. but AJ's making anywhere between $4 and $7 million to come.
That would be more than
a rookie contract first year.
If he's
in
the late teens, he probably wouldn't make that.
So
no, he's not getting what AJ's getting.
Sure, right. But let's say it's even half, right? But you're still, so let's say you just put your first year of the NBA back a year. You make $2 million this year, $3 million this year. I don't think money at that point becomes a factor, right? Like it's pretty much a wash. And so at that point, you're looking at like, maybe you're throwing away a potential year of NBA development, because as we all know, like when you're in college, it's impossible to put in as much work as you need to into playing basketball to be effective on an NBA level. Like you have to be among NBA staff, have access to
which
NBA
Kevin would argue
facilities.
He is among NBA staff.
Sure, and so he has that, right? So again, there's counter arguments to all of this, but I think time by itself, I think, is the biggest factor in the NBA that you have more of than you would in college, right? You have college, you have classes, you have social life, and NBA, you probably have social life too, but it's just different, right?
You have 82 games to get better against the top players in the world.
Yeah, you're playing more. Yeah, so again, I think there's a lot of factors into this. If you're Kevin Young, what are you telling Yegor? Because at the end of the day, like that's Kevin Young's pitch to future recruits, is that I can get you NBA ready as soon as possible. Like, so you look at Yegor, is he telling Yegor like, hey, selfishly, I want you in the NBA because then I can tell the next guy, I got Yegor into the NBA in a year? Or are you more thinking like, if I have Yegor and AJ on the floor at the same time and Richie Saunders, like we're an Elite Eight team, we're maybe a Final Four team. Like, is he selfishly thinking that?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, I could see the pros and the cons. Obviously, AJ coming onto your team really changes everything because he has to have the ball.
Yeah.
Like Yegor, the ball's gonna be in AJ's hands. And it should be, as you might imagine, right? And so, does Yegor fit with AJ? I think Yegor's such an unselfish player that I think he could fit with a lot of people. If I'm Kevin, I feel like Kevin cares about his players, and if Yegor really wants to go, I don't think Kevin would, force him to stay, nor can he really force him. But I also think there are some pitches if Kevin wants him to stay that, like we said, you already have an NBA staff here. We can pay you whatever the money is that you feel like you need. I'm sure they probably could. And, I know Yegor really likes the culture at BYU. I know he really likes the people. I mean, I've talked to a lot of the people that have been around him, and I think they really feel like he's a great fit in the community. And so I wouldn't be surprised if he stayed. I also wouldn't be surprised if he left.
I don't know if you saw his interview with BYU TV, Spencer Linton, after their loss to Alabama, but he wasn't emotional during the interview, but you could tell he was emotional before. He had the red kind of glossed eyes. Like you could tell that he was emotional. And I'm going to admit something. I was in choir in high school. I remember this is so dumb. Why am I saying this? I remember my last concert, and like I was emotional during that. So it's like, and like it's a totally different situation. But like people are emotional when they're saying goodbye, right? And when they're saying goodbye to someone they've been with, or a team they've been with for a whole season. So like, I think there's a lot of emotions around that, and I think it's probably not fair to read into that and think like, oh, like Yegor really loved his time at BYU, and how could he say no to another season after being that emotional after a loss to Alabama? But like,
it's hard to say. It's easy to say yes to the lottery.
I know, like take 24 hours and he's looking at a lot of money in the NBA. Like that emotion's going to be different, right? Like I don't think that really factors in. But you're right. I think when you compare like his interview with BYU TV, and I think Cannon did an interview with like the Daily Universe. Is it still called the Daily? I think it's just called the Universe. Completely different mindsets, right? Like you knew Cannon. By the way, I think those of us that were kind of, I don't want to say in the know, but those of us that like knew people connected to the team knew that Cannon was gone months ago. Like I think even before his injury, he was gone months ago. I'm surprised he even got any playing time in the tournament at all.
Yeah, well, after his injury, I would have was he 100%?
Well, even if he was,
right.
I'm surprised.
Sure.
I'm surprised. And that's not to say Cannon. So I think you can have an attitude issue. I think it's fair to say that his attitude wasn't the best. I don't think he was a quote unquote cancer in the locker room, meaning he wasn't kind of outspoken. I don't think he was really like trying to.
Yeah, he wasn't super demonstrative.
Form like a coup or something against the coaching staff. Like nothing like that. I just think he just felt like he wasn't getting what he wanted out of this experience, and again, we wish him the best. But anyway, to compare his post-game interview to Yegor or really anyone else, like it's just night and day difference. I did want to talk real quick though because we talked about Yegor potentially staying or leaving. I think it's safe to say Richie's probably staying, but at the very least, BYU should go full court press on him to stay. We know Trey's gone. We know Foose is gone. We know Trevin's gone. Right? They're graduating. Who's next on your list of like BYU needs to keep this guy? Or is it kind of just like a free-for-all, like if someone leaves, BYU will find someone to replace him?
Well, I mean, I'm biased to Dallin.
Sure.
Dallin's my guy, and I think he's a heck of a player. Obviously, he didn't play his best basketball late in the season, particularly in that game, which I know he's bummed about. But, if I'm a coach, I definitely want Dallin Hall on my team, whether he had a bad game or not. I think for these guys in deciding whether they come back or not, a lot of it's going to be what the coaching staff talks to them about what next year is going to look like. Because, like I said, it's going to be a lot different with AJ.
Yeah.
I mean, when you have the number one overall recruit in the country coming to your team, like that's a different dynamic than anything they've had before. And so I think for the players, it will be a lot of, well, where do I fit with AJ? And where do you see me? Obviously, like, what's the money going to be like? Let's just be real. That is what it is these days. But if the money's fine, where do I fit as well? Because I want to understand what my role is. And so I think, whether they come back or not, I think will be obviously heavily dependent on those conversations they have with the staff.
Yeah. One thing I kind of want to go back to what we talked about at the beginning, which is the Alabama game. Because I know that you had studied up a little bit on what Alabama was doing to BYU to stop them offensively. Granted, BYU still scored 88. Did they do anything different than other teams that you had seen throughout the season, or what did they do that effectively? I don't want to say shut down BYU, but BYU I think at one point was like 1 of 15 from three.
Yeah, Alabama guarded them. I mean, I haven't studied how every team guarded BYU this year, but it seemed to me that there weren't many or any teams that guarded them exactly how Alabama. Basically, in short, Alabama stayed to the shooters, right? They really didn't help that much. For example, BYU likes to run a slot or a wing ball screen with Yegor or Dallin, and typically you have a Richie or Trevin in the corner, ball side corner. And a very common thing that BYU loved to do is use that ball screen, and then the player in the corner utilizes what we call a shake action. It's kind of an NBA term where the player in the corner lifts to the wing to get a better passing angle. And Yegor and even Dallin would love to throw that. They would come off the ball screen. The guarding the player in the corner would help, and they would what we call a snapback pass back to the wing. And Alabama, instead of helping on the ball screen, they just basically denied that snapback pass, and I hadn't seen a lot of teams do that. And basically what they said, okay, we're not going to help on the ball screen, and the guard and the big and the ball screen is going to be a 2-on-2 game, and everybody else is going to stay to the shooters, which is a really unique way to guard. And you saw that forced BYU to have to try to throw some lobs, which there was a couple turnovers from those. Dallin and Yegor were forced to, when the big didn't commit to them, have to shoot the floater or maybe the little mid-range game. And BYU scored actually several times on it. So, Once again, you're picking your poison with what you're going to take away. But Alabama said, no, you're not going to beat us from three. You're not going to beat us from your snapback pass that you throw back to Richie and he can either shoot or drive the closeout. You're going to have to beat us with a 2-on-2 ball screen game. And, when you look at everybody's like, well, BYU still scored a bunch of points. Yeah, but when you look at the number of possessions, what really matters is the points per possession. because there was, I think I looked at it, there was around 92 possessions in the Alabama game, just because both teams are very, very fast paced. Whereas you compare that to like Houston, that's a 75 possession game. So what is that? That's 17 more possessions in the Alabama game, which is why you still see BYU score high. But when you look at points per possession, Bama held BYU under 1. So 1 point per possession is typically like a cutoff to, if you're above 1, that's solid. If you're below 1, that's not solid. Wisconsin, BYU is 1.12. VCU, BYU is 1.01. Houston BYU is 0.72, which you can see why Houston wins a lot. Has the best, one of the best defenses in the country. But at Bama, it was 0.957, so they were under 1. So Bama, that definitely, it didn't, completely shut BYU down, but it definitely affected, the effectiveness and forcing BYU to do some of those things maybe they don't love to do. Jaeger prefers to come off the ball screen and just find people. Yeah. And they said, nope, you're not doing that. You got to become a scorer, or you got to throw that lob.
Which he did. He got his points, right?
Correct.
But that's a good point. And at the end of the day, like Alabama was trading 2s for 3s, right? They were getting 3s, BYU was getting 2s, and that was what worked. So, now we look ahead to next season, and we've already talked about who they're going to hopefully bring on. It's going to be interesting to kind of follow BYU this offseason, because I do think that this is now where Kevin Young has the highest expectations. I think that we thought with Jaeger and with Cannon coming on and bringing Richie and Dallin back, I actually thought Dallin would have a bigger season than Richie. But I think we expected BYU to make the tournament. We thought Sweet 16 felt like maybe their ceiling. It really feels like next season, depending on who they bring in, and they're already bringing in AJ. They're already bringing in Dominique, and then whoever they bring back, Stanton as well. It feels like it's kind of Sweet 16 or bust. Like if they don't make the Sweet 16, it's almost like a failure. And so then at that point, like, what's the ceiling? What's the ceiling for BYU? Like, can they become an elite team, make a Cinderella run, or even not a Cinderella run? Maybe they are a 1 or a 2 seed then going into the NCAA tournament, and they have the number 2 offense and the number 5 defense, or the number 10 defense. Like, I think the sky is kind of the limit for this team, and it'll be interesting to see, like, can they now meet those expectations that's been set on them? Well,
when you have the number 1 player in the country, there's going to be a ton of expectation on you. But I think I'm sure that's what Kevin wants, and Kevin's put together. I mean, Kevin, with his background and the staff he's put together and who they're going after and the money that they have, I mean, I think Kevin would agree that the expectations are high, and he would set those expectations. So, what is that? I'm sure they want to be a top 3 seed, 1, 2, 3 seed, and be a favorite to. I mean, they want to compete for a national championship, is what I would guess.
Yeah.
I think anything. Now, once again, is your season a failure if you don't win a national championship or you go to the Final Four? Well, that's probably overstating it, because I mean, there's only 4 teams that can go to the Final Four.
Yeah.
So, if you can make consistent runs, though, deep into the tournament, not first round lot. First of all, get to the tournament. I heard an interview with Mark Few. He's like, with Gonzaga, it's like, we made the tournament every year that people just assume we're in. It's like, no, you got to battle to get in the tournament, first of all.
Especially in that conference, right?
Especially in that conference.
It's a 1 or 2 team bid or league. So
give them credit for making it, first of all. And then, if you can get to a Sweet 16, that's a fabulous season. Now, once again, when you have the number 1 player in the country and what they've built, I think the expectations are higher than that at this point.
Yeah. Future is bright for BYU basketball. That's going to do it for us today. Brian, thanks for hopping on. Always appreciate your insight. Granted, we've only had it twice on a show. We'll have to get you on more, but I always appreciate it. It's always fun to talk to you.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, this is the Loyal Cougars Podcast. I'm your host, Jake Edmonds. Brian Swindlehurst joining us. We'll see you next week.